Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. It is your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing details. Today, we're discussing a 2022 update of a model originally launched back in 2014. This is the Patek Philippe Nautilus Travel Time Chronograph, reference 5990/1A-011. The 011 has a blue dial. The watch is 40.5 millimeters in diameter in stainless steel, 12.9 millimeters thick as I measure it. Two different ways to measure the case. If it's just the case, no bracelet, then it's 45.5 millimeters lug to lug. But as you can see, we have these intermediate links, and there's some rigidity to the bracelet, so you want to measure these outermost boundaries to get a sense of how far it really stretches across the wrist, and that is 51.5 millimeters. We'll throw it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters circumference, and you can see it's fairly compact, but it is somewhat broad-shouldered. I'd recommend it for a wrist as small as 15 centimeters circumference. I think any smaller than 15, the lack of flexibility in the bracelet is going to create some problems arcing it around your wrist. That said, it's less than half a millimeter thicker than the 5980 Nautilus chronograph, so it really is quite well packaged and thin for the amount of complication you get. And you can see that it would easily slide underneath the cuff. With a sloped flank and a thickness of under 13 millimeters, you're good to go there. Again, I think a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference or larger is going to wear this really well. It's beautifully made. The original Nautilus of 1976, designed by Gerald Genta, who had a couple of years to ruminate on his landmark Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, and he decided to save some elements but improve others. Let's talk about what he kept. He kept the integration of case, lugs, and bracelet. Genta considered himself a jewelry designer, and he wanted to design watches that were jewelry first and foremost. And so the integration of these components creates the appearance of a bracelet on the wrist that just happens to contain a timepiece. The wing-like profile of the Nautilus case was a departure from the Royal Oak, and there are a few more we'll talk about in a moment, but the integration of the bracelet with its taper down to the clasp was very much in keeping with his design for AP. Now you can see here we have these polished intermediates, and as the bracelet tapers, you can see that the outer links taper and shrink, but so do these intermediate links. They shrink down a little bit too from the top down to the clasp. The flanks or shoulders are actually polished to match the bevel of the lug shoulder, and then the outer faces are satinated and the primary links are longitudinally satinated. Hours upon hours of finish go into the Nautilus bracelets and cases, one of the traditional reasons why they cost a premium over the less complex aquanauts. Here we have a clasp with two little flourishes that emulate the Calatrava cross or the logo of Patek Philippe. Double deployant clasp, twin trigger release, so you have to press both, not just one, to open this. It's a very secure sports watch style clasp. When you close it, you can see the intact Calatrava cross. You can see there are some marks here. I always want to make sure I accurately portray the watch. Truth in advertising, these are pre-owned timepieces. We have removable links that are fixed by pins and sleeves. Patek's rationale is that you can't strip them out and strand the screw inside the link, and that's true. That is something you can do with a flathead screw. They also claim that these are harder to back out by accident than flathead screws, but you will need a block and punch if you want to size these at home. That's the real drawback with pin sleeves. You need a block and a punch to make adjustments, but if you buy this watch from us, we'll set it up for you so it arrives ready to fit your wrist. Screw down crown, 120 meter water resistance. You could see that Patek Philippe integrated the chronograph pushers elegantly into the profile, so it doesn't much disrupt Genta's design. Taking a look, you can see that the case really is quite a bit more complex than the Aquanaut, and that's always been one of the elements that accounts for the longer production time, lower production, and higher price of a Nautilus over an Aquanaut. Now you can see that the selectors for the travel time function for the mobile local hour hand, they've been integrated into the wing at 9 o'clock, so they don't interrupt the profile at all. Now, I said that Genta changed a few things when he moved from his Royal Oak to the Nautilus, which he penned 4 years later. The integration of the wing profile is part of it, but so is the coherence of the bezel. Like the Royal Oak, it's a rounded polygon, but unlike the Royal Oak, which has a round dial, a round inner bezel, and a round crystal, you can see the outer bezel, The inner bezel, the crystal, and the dial all have the same shape, and that feels like a more fully realized and more cohesive design to me. Some thought went into this. It's harder to make it water resistant given the shape, but Patek, with a screw-down crown and a robust case, is still able to get the 120 meters that you'd get out of a 5711. We have vertical satination atop the bezel, polish on its sides, and then the dial, which you can see is a sort of slate blue-gray. It's a gradient fade, so lighter at its center, darker at its edges. The hands as well as the indices are white gold, so they won't tarnish, oxidize, or fade over time. And we have the horizontal striations or ribbing that's been a feature of the Nautilus since 1976. We'll do a quick lume shot here so you can see the watch in the dark. Not hard to read the time. Okay, travel time, how does it work? Well, you've got this local hour hand adjustment system, so you can move the local hour hand, and you'll note how the date will jump forward or backwards as you do. You can easily adjust the date forward or backwards as you jump across the international date line, and your local time will change, and your date will be keyed to the local time, but the seconds will not stop, the minute hand will not budge, and that reference time, or your home time, is going to stay right where it is. So because these are both 12-hour hands, you can superimpose them and clean up the dial when you don't need the second time zone. The local AM/PM lets you know whether it's day or night where you are, and then the home time lets you know whether it's day or night in the place you are not. Generally that's home time, but it can be any remote time zone where you are not. And so because both these hands move in 12-hour sweeps, they need these little distinctions so you know whether you're looking at day or night when you look at the hand, and that allows them to stay superimposed as they move in 12-hour circuits around the dial. We have the pointer style date, and we've got a flyback chronograph actually. Reset and restart without first stopping the watch. Take a look at the chronograph register. You can see that it features a 60-minute scale, which I wish we'd see on every chronograph minutes register. Why stop at 30? If your hour counter starts at 1 and your chronograph minutes end at 30, that's a big uncovered span of time. I like this 60-minute counter because it allows me to time, for example, a 47-minute interval. Flip it all over. It's the same basic movement that debuted back in 2006 on the 5960 annual calendar chronograph and the 5980 Patek Philippe Nautilus chronograph. Obviously, it gains some complication, but fundamentally it is the same base. Unidirectional automatic winding with ceramic bearings for high efficiency, 55-hour power reserve, 4 Hz beat rate. It's free sprung for durability, adjusted in 6 positions. It has that Gyromax style, historic Patek Philippe free sprung architecture, and it has an anti-magnetic and thermally resilient silicon Spiromax hairspring that makes this a very tough movement, resilient against magnetism. Now, with the combination of the Patek Philippe seal, the Gyromax balance, the Spiromax hairspring, and the 6-position adjustment, this movement is guaranteed to run from the factory no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per 24 hours, and it all pivots on 34 jewels. It features a combination of a column wheel for crisp sound and feel to the chronograph, a very traditional way of making a chronograph, and it uses a vertical clutch. So when you start the chronograph, watch the seconds hand, there's no jump or stagger or secondary motion. Vertical clutches have no place. There is no play. That's banished from the old lateral clutches of yore. Also, with the vertical clutch, you can leave the chrono running full-time if you like, which is helpful on a watch like this that has a fairly dead dial when the chronograph's not in action. It doesn't actually have a constant seconds display, so you can just leave the chrono running, and then you can have your hours, your minutes, and your seconds. And although the watch doesn't have a hacking seconds function, set the hour and quickly synchronize when your reference time second hand is at 0, and you can treat the flyback like a 0 reset second system to synchronize. The movement is very nicely finished. Just as the case is heavily hand decorated, so is the movement. All the standards you would expect on a Geneva hallmark movement are still present, even though Patek Philippe has used its own seal since 2009. The standard of finish is undiminished. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details of this watch as it beats away at 4 Hz, hopefully on your wrist. One last quick note, I almost forgot one of the coolest parts of this bracelet. The bracelet has been upgraded over time. This is a new clasp introduced in just the last few years, but you have a push-button micro-adjust built in, about 2 millimeters of adjustability, and you will find that this push-button micro-adjustability is present on each side of the clasp for fine-tuning the size when you don't have that block and punch handy for the bracelet. The more you know.